Hi everyone, my name is Kyle. I am a popular culture professor and longtime collector, and I have recently returned to collecting action figures for the first time in years and years. And one of the big reasons why I returned to collecting action figures is because of the NECA horror line. So I'm very interested in NECA toys. And given that I have hopped back into this and I'm trying to become more familiarized with what people like and what I like again and how to be a part of action figure communities, I decided that I wanted to grab some of these figures and maybe share a few of my thoughts and perhaps my experience with getting back into action figure collecting can be interesting or helpful for those who might also be interested in action figures and specifically the NECA horror line. I have also started dabbling in action figure photography, so I might be able to post some things here and there about the photography as I continue to practice and maybe hone my craft and get a little bit better at it. I have joined in some communities to help out there. But this particular video is to basically just say hi, tell you who I am, and also to give my first of what I hope to be a series of reviews for the NECA horror figures. And I'm excited to jump in and let you know what I think, and I would be excited to hear what you think about the NECA horror line as well. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let me tell you about the figure that got me, the one that pulled me right back into collecting action figures. I'm just going to start by reviewing this particular figure today. It is NECA's Creature from the Black Lagoon. I am a big sucker for the Universal monster movies, and I had been admiring the Universal monster figures for a long time, and then I discovered that there were black and white versions of these characters available, or of these figures available, and there's a lot of reflection on that, but you can see that it's a black and white figure. I'll have clearer shots when I'm talking about the figure in a minute. Just incredible. I love the movie Creature from the Black Lagoon. The pacing, I think, gives it a little bit of a bad rap from people sometimes, but the concepts are so good, tying the monster to the environment, creating a sense of relationship between humankind and the environment and context that they're in. It's horror that speaks to really interesting, really important issues, right? And so I love the movie, and this figure stood out to me as I was walking through a store. I had been contemplating the possibility of getting back into action figures, and this one just suckered me back in. So NECA's Creature from the Black Lagoon, black and white, is the one that got me, and that's what I'd like to talk to you all about in this review. So I'm actually going to try and go through a process of talking you through 5 things that are important to me about action figures. One is the packaging, and what does that do for us, right? Secondly is the sculpt. I think that's a pretty common one to talk about. The articulation, another really important, really common thing to talk about with action figures. The accessories that it comes with. And then finally, the pricing. So do we get our money's worth by purchasing this figure? And I have some ideas for you on each of those areas. Let's keep talking about it. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about is packaging, and I think in general, the NECA Universal Monsters line does a really, really great job with their packaging. Myself, and I know some of my friends, like to grab these NECA figures and just kind of take the boxes and slide them into bookshelves or onto movie cases, and they look really great there. It's an easy way to store them. And it also makes the figures really easy to display. The fact that they have these windows for the figure lets us see inside, gives us a little bit of a pose here, makes it really easy to not only store but also display the figure. So I have a pretty positive opinion about the packaging. Here are some specific things that I think are really interesting and helpful. I love that this whole line has the movie cover up front, using some of the original artwork and posters to create the front of the boxes here. And even though we have this really cool throwback movie cover on the front, we also have some additional poses of the figure, so you can see a few of the things that this figure can actually do once you take it out of the box. And all together, if we include the extra pose that we have when you open the window and look inside, there are 7 poses, right? So the interior plus everything on the sides and the back of the box gives us a sense of what the product is and what we're getting by purchasing this thing. The fact that they do that means that we have a really good expectation of the contents of the box. So before we even purchase, we not only know that this belongs to a Universal Monster line, but we have a sense of the posability and articulation and things that we can do with this figure, in addition to just being able to open up and look inside, right? I still have some glare there. I apologize. So we have a really clear picture of what it is that we are getting when we look at this figure. The one thing that I wish they could have done a little bit differently is to do more to indicate some of the functionality of the figure. As we'll talk about in a few minutes, there are some features like being able to move the mouth on one of the head sculpts of the figure. And it took me a while to figure out that the mouthpiece was movable. I suppose that one could maybe infer that from the fact that there are 4 poses here on the back and only 3 heads available, but something to indicate the functionality of the figure would have also been nice. Even so, that's kind of a small detail on an otherwise really great box that has the series line. You've got the credits, right, for the creators on the bottom. You've got a reference to the specific original film. You've got things about posability. So altogether, I'd probably give the packaging a 4.5 out of 5. This is a really, really good box and something that's going to be great for storage, something that's good about informing the consumer about what's inside the product or the product that's contained inside the box. It's nice for display. It's informative. I think this is a really, really good example of packaging a figure well. Now that we have talked about the packaging of the figure, let's take it out of the box and get a look at the figure itself. NECA makes this nice and easy to open the top of the box. You have some pretty standard tabs for packaging. You fold down one little piece up front and you can slide the figure out of the box. So we're going to go ahead and put the box aside over here, and then you just have the plastic packaging with the figure inside. So the figure itself is loose, especially after you cut off the little rubber ties that keep it attached. But then there are some snap-on plastic seals to help keep the accessories in place when you're moving the package. That's really nice. I'm going to go ahead and take out the figure, and we're going to talk about the sculpt for a minute. Okay, here's the figure itself, and in my opinion, this is a really, really well-made figure. So the idea right now is to talk through the sculpt. I'm going to bring it just a little bit closer for a moment. Look at the scales. Look at the detail on the scales. There's not only the big plated scaling like we see with the clear dividers on the arms here, but also a texturing that you can feel that's constituted by smaller scales across this figure. We also get a lot of details on the face here. We've got a lot of different cuts here to create the gills. On the back, we have something very similar here. These are all part of their own texture, right? So this looks very, very close to the movie character. Looks really great. The hands, you get a lot of detail here with the specific claws. You can see the points for the different phalanges there. So very cool, very cool. And then there's a lot of intensity in the eyes. Each of these heads that you can place on the body of the figure have these really intense eyes that look great. The feet have at least as much detail here in the fins as the hands do, if not even more. So they stretch out a bit more, and then you have the back of these fins that have their own spikes and have their own little tassels attached to them there. So very cool. Lots of detail there. Very expressive faces. And a thing that I really like is that the points of articulation are very easily hidden. So something that can sort of spoil, I think, otherwise good figures is that there can be really good sculpts, but then where all of the joints have been placed is really obvious. And so that's a cue to the audience that this is just a toy, right? It really hurts the suspension of disbelief if you're doing something like figure photography. So the fact that these large scale plates that they created for the sculpt actually cover up most of the points of articulation, especially in the knees and in the arms here, is really helpful. I also think the plates help to cover up what's going on with the chest and the overall torso as well. So the figure looks extremely realistic compared to its movie counterpart. And honestly, I've got to give the sculpt a full 5 out of 5. This is, of the monster figures that I've collected, this is my 5th NECA. This was my first out of 5 NECA figures that I've collected now. And I think this sculpt is one of, if not the best, of the NECA Universal monsters. Okay, let's spend a few minutes talking about articulation. There are some things that stand out as being really good and interesting for this figure. It has all the standard points of articulation, so you have at the ankles and the knees, and then as the thigh connects to the torso here, the figure can twist a little bit at the waist, but even more up at the top of the torso. You've got the 3 standard points in the arms, very similar to the legs, and you have the head on a ball joint that swivels. So the standard points of articulation are there, and I think that's really good and helpful. And this particular head piece has a posable mouth, so that can be closed, or it can open up a bit more, and even all the way up to having the totally open, very fish-looking mouth. So I think that's a pretty cool point of articulation, if that's where that would count, and that works really well for the figure. It's unique and interesting and moves in a way that other figures don't necessarily move. So the way that this figure can articulate is pretty good for things like crouching. But even then, there can be some problems, right? So it all depends on the pose. Let me just move the feet a little bit there, and that should make it easier. There we go. So we have the full crouch. And so the figure works well for being able to do some kind of lumbering, menacing looking poses. So you can see the crouch here as I've been describing. It's pretty good for standing. So if you stand the figure up straight, you're not going to have too difficult of a time getting it to stay in place. And also for things like lurching. So if you want the creature to kind of be leaning forward and looming, you've got to be careful not to put too much weight forward. But if you position it to where the figure is kind of leaning back on the heels, you can create this sense that it is lurched forward. As you can see from the side here, there is a lot of bending in the direction in front of it. So it can get away with shifting its weight in a lot of ways. This figure is particularly balanced, and I think a lot of that is due to the feet. These are really large feet for a figure, which make for an excellent base, and the figure is therefore incredibly balanced. So it's easy to actually set the figure down and let it be a little more freestanding. I did have some things that I wish could work a little bit different. So for example, this figure has very limited mobility on the neck and head. This is about as far up as the head goes, and you have to lean it back to get anything else. And that's sort of sad for me because this character is known for like swimming through water, and there's some POV shots looking down at the character in the movie. And it would have been really nice if the head and neck would have come up a little bit more. Something that I've done for a few photos and posing is to just detach the head and to just kind of angle it upward. So you sit it down where the chin is kind of resting on the neck. And if you take a photo or something from above the figure this way, it'll look a little bit more like it's looking upward. But yeah, the limited head and neck mobility could be better. Also, the feet don't really point down very much, so that's as far as they go on their own unless you bend the leg and the knee with them. And to me, the difficulty of this is that the creature is a swimmer. So if you wanted to put the creature in a little transparent holder that would keep it posed in the air so that you could do a swimming pose, then it would be really difficult to do that. The arms, you can plausibly do that. The arms will raise up pretty high above the head and can do the swim-like poses. But with the feet, there's not much you can do to make it look like the feet are going out behind the figure or flattening out so that they can give the illusion of swimming. So just a little disadvantage there. Also, because of the way that the scales come out so far, or the armor of the Gill Man comes out so far on the sculpt, that does limit the ability to bring the arms in or do anything that gets kind of close to the head. So there are some limitations there too. Probably just kind of little things. There's still a lot of good posability, and again, the sheer balance of this figure kind of cancels out some of the other negatives. But those are some limitations that could maybe be improved. For articulation, I would give this figure a 3.5 out of 5. Okay, let's talk about accessories. We're going to set the main figure aside for a moment and look at what we've got here. As I mentioned before, there are clear plastic layers that snap on and off to help keep the accessories in place. And NECA is really good about including an array of accessories with a lot of their figures, which is why they can go for a little bit higher price point, I think, than some others. Okay, so these are loose now. As you can see, we have 2 additional heads, and these do not have posable mouths. They have fixed expressions, but those fixed expressions are very close to a lot of what we see in the movie. And there are 6 additional hands that we can snap on and off of the figure. Let's get a little bit closer here. So we have this head that's fairly menacing. The mouth is open, so this would be good for underwater poses or really expressive poses. And it's got the really intense looking eyes there. Really, it's the mouth movement or mouth sculpt that's a little bit different and unique on each of these. We've got the additional head there with the mouth closed. It's a very neutral look. It's going to be really great for different kinds of posing because it just is the standard facial features of the creature. And then we have the different kinds of hands. I really, really like the curled hands here that create like a pointing looking pose. And then we also have swimmer style hands here where the webbing is really spread out between the fingers. And something very similar here, but there's a little bit more of a curve in this hand, almost as if it is moving through the water or as if it is sort of pointing or articulating even while the fingers are spread. So we have the closed hands, we have the swimming hands, we have the sort of monstrous pose kind of hands, in addition to the standard ones that I showed you already. A little bit more about accessories here. So we have some really fun, cool looking accessories like the different head sculpts, and we do have a few different hands, so there are interchangeable hands. Usually I like to apply a little bit of heat before snapping the hands in and out, but for our purposes today, I'm just going to kind of do it as normal. Okay, so we have the kind of curled hands here, which I think are cool. So we've got the clear claws, we've got the fingers pointing out. I think this is really good for posing. So the curled fingers look really great. That's actually, besides the head with the movable mouth, probably my favorite accessory for the figure. As far as the other hands, these are all right, but I might have personally just left out some of the other hands if it meant getting different kinds of accessories. So you can see the standard hand here. We've got another webbed hand, and the fingers are spread out slightly more. This is kind of cool for maybe swimming situations or where you want to make it seem like the creature is agitated or something. But it's not all that different than the standard hand. This hand also has the fingers spread, and it's curling the fingers a little bit more with that. So it's kind of a halfway between the swimmer hand and the standard hand. But again, these additional hands are not all that different from the standard hand sculpt, and they're really not all that different from each other. They're both spread fingers, just one is a little more curled than the other. So personally, I would have liked to see this hand also continue to be included, but maybe we could have replaced the other midpoint hand with something else, because ultimately most of these NECA Ultimate Universal Monster figures have plenty of accessories, and that often includes hands that are interchangeable and heads that are interchangeable, but they typically come with some props as well. So the curled hands and the alternate heads are great, but it would have also been pretty cool to get alternatives like maybe having some kind of net, or have a harpoon, or some kind of diving tank. All of those things would have been interesting accessories that we could do something with. Like with the curled hand, the creature could pretty easily, I think, hold a tank. With the other hand sculpts, it would be easy to create poses as if the creature were trying to escape, say, a net, or grab a harpoon or something like that. So the accessories are all right. Some of them are really good, some of them look pretty similar, and it seems like extra heads and hands in this case replaced having other props available, which I think makes the accessories a little bit less desirable than other figures in this line. For me, that means the accessories are at a 3.5 out of 5. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is pricing. And I do think that overall this is a pretty good figure for the cost. Where I live in the southern United States, this runs for about $35. And there are fewer accessories than maybe I would have hoped for a figure in this line. I do think we get maybe a little more stuff from other figures that are priced exactly the same, but Also, the sculpt is so good, and it does have the additional head sculpts and hands, and you do get some bonus things here, so I would have rathered this been in more the $30 range, but given that it's a part of a standard line that runs about $35 most of the time, it's not bad. What you get is pretty equitable compared to other things in the series. So I would say that this figure is actually priced pretty well. It's 35 is a little bit higher than you would get for other toys in, say, superhero series or something like that often run at 25 or 30. But I also think the sculpt is just so much better than the things that you get in, say, the $20 or $25 range. The joints and points of articulation are hidden. You have a lot of possible poses, and you do get some accessories which are rare to get in the lower price range. So as far as pricing, I would give this figure a 4 out of 5. Thanks for sticking with me and listening to the review. Kind of in sum, I do really love this figure. This is a figure that is near and dear to my own personal cinematic tastes. It represents the figure that got me back into action figure collecting after years and years of being away, and I really like it. Using the scoring system that I was trying to apply throughout the rest of the video, this figure would come out at kind of a B score, but I love the sculpt so much, and the fact that it brought me back into collecting means that it holds a little bit of a special place in my heart too. So I think I would be willing to give it perhaps some bonus points because it looks so great. It's just really hard to beat that sculpt. I think it looks as good, if not better, than all of the other NECA Universal Monster figures that I've seen. So I would personally be willing to give this a B plus or maybe even an A minus. I think it's a really solid figure, especially for its price, and I really have enjoyed doing some figure photography with it and being able to display it in my home. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing a little bit more about my experience with this figure of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and I'll be looking forward to sharing my thoughts on a few more of the Universal Monster figures with you soon.